Welcome to Global Connect 2024. I hope you are enjoying your conference experience thus far and soaking in all the great learning and key insights. I am Michelle Yanahan, Principal and owner of ChangeFit 360. We are an ACMP qualified education provider. This session is human-centric change. In this session, I will define what human-centric change is and why we're in need of human-centric change so desperately now. Then we'll learn some key strategies and actions for immediate practice to bring more human centricity into our change management efforts. So what exactly is human centricity? What is human-centric change? First of all, we have to define customer centricity. I'm sure all of our organizations and companies focus on creating the best experience possible for customers. That old adage, the customer is king, still rings true. We listen to our customers, we take feedback from them, we provide concessions for them. In fact, customers are at the center of our organization's philosophy, operations, or ideas. Customers matter, not only for your organization to survive, but also to thrive. Some interesting statistics from Zendex on customer experience. It's interesting to note that 52% of customers will remain with a company or an organization that is able to quickly resolve the problems or issues that they may have. And another interesting fact is 64% of customers will actually spend more money or pay more to an organization that has done right by them, that has quickly solved their issues or problems. So clearly, customer centricity, customer focus is important. But do organizations extend that same level of service to their employees? Does customer centricity lend itself to human centricity or employee centricity or stakeholder centricity? I don't think it always does. Human centricity can be defined as really creating the best experience for people, and that means meeting them where they're at individually and fulfilling their own needs. It's putting employees or people or our stakeholders at the center of our organization. That's what human centricity is. It's really more about the human, the individual, the employee, or the stakeholder. And if you think about it, employees are the lifeblood of organizations. They're really what sets one organization apart from another. So, why not human centricity? And why not human centric change now? So I mentioned now. Why now? What's happening in our business operating environment within our organizations that is really driving the need to be more human centric? First, consider attrition and turnover. The Great Resignation and quiet quitting, two social movements that started in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and still continue today. The Great Resignation, 40 million people left their jobs or the workforce entirely to reduce stress and achieve better work life balance. Those left in the organizations that hit the Great Resignation were tasked with doing more, taking on more work. And soon after, those folks became involved in some sort of quiet quitting behavior. Quiet quitting is also a reaction to stress and overwork and burden and lack of balance. Quiet quitting, simply defined, is doing minimally what's necessary to remain employed. doing minimally what's necessary to achieve your job, nothing above discretionary performance or productivity. And it's interesting that a statistic I recently looked at said that 50% of workers are engaged in some sort of quiet quitting behavior. Quiet quitting has turned into minimal Mondays and some other fun name for Fridays. It's really a social movement that has taken shape and is continues on. So, in the midst of all those social movements, if we think about attrition, turnover, and hiring, when we hire or bring a new employee into our organization, it can take up to 8 months for that employee to become productive, according to Zippia.com. And during the first 6 months of that new employee's employment, 33% of new employees will be looking for a new role either within their organization or outside, while 31% will actually leave their current role or their current organization for a new opportunity. All this happens at a cost to business of over $1 trillion annually, and the percentage of attrition is about 18%. And that number has been steady strong for many years. But certainly, this great resignation and quiet quitting that came out of the COVID pandemic, that behavior continues today. While attrition and turnover is on the rise, as well as combating these social movements, we continue to see a uptick in the amount of innovation and change that our organizations are trying to consume and operationalize. In fact, Gartner said in a recent study that organizations had done 5 enterprise projects over the last 3 years. 5 enterprise, highly complex, highly disruptive projects over the last 3 years. That was an average. And those same organizations, 75% of them in the Gartner study said they expect the number of enterprise projects that they are taking on to increase in the years to come. Clearly, innovation and change, speed and velocity is not changing or slowing down anytime in the near future. Nobody in business or in the change management industry is saying that we're going to stop or slow down anytime soon. If anything, innovation and change will just continue to grow and move very rapidly. So enterprise projects on the increase. But look at this statistic from Gartner in blue here about fatigue and saturation. During the pandemic, the amount of change the average employee could absorb went down to less than 50% of what it was prior to the pandemic. And if you think about that, the pandemic really pushed work and life together, kind of all meshed together. And the pandemic itself brought so many changes. We were already at capacity, lots of organizations before the pandemic. And with the pandemic, the amount of fatigue and saturation that people are experiencing is extreme. Gartner's research is also backed up by a ProSci Best Practice in Change Management report, where 73% of organizations reported that they were change saturated. And what that means is the amount of disruption or change in the business operating environment is greater than what people can consume. So there's an overflow. That is change saturation. So innovation and change increasing, fatigue and saturation increasing, turnover and attrition and the social movements all in motion. Great reasons for why human-centric change and why human-centric change now. So before we get into some strategies and actions to bring forward human-centric change, I think it's important to pause and reflect on what people really need to successfully adapt and adopt to change. And we're going to use these factors to map to our human-centric change elements. I believe that people need 3 things to successfully adapt and adopt to change. First, people need to know. They need to know about the change. Why is this change happening? When is it happening? Who is impacted? What are the benefits for me? How will I be supported? General information and communication. And if we ask leaders or project professionals about needing to communicate for projects and change, of course they're going to say yes, that's something we do. It is a common task on our project or change plans, the need to know, all about information and communication. The second need is the need to do, and this is all about building skills, competencies, capabilities, and learning. And also, if you would go back to those same leaders and project managers and ask them about teaching people or learning or training as part of projects and change, this is very well understood, this need, and also a very clear task on a project plan or a change plan. But need to know and need to do alone, if we just do those two things, if we tell people about change and we show them how to change, will they change? I would argue no, because something's still missing. Need to know and need to do, while critically important, are trying to change people by logic alone. And if you think about diets as an example, going on a diet, people know what they need to do, eat healthy food, exercise, sit less, watch less TV, etc., be more active. They also, we've showed people how to make healthy food, how to work out, have trainers. So that need to do's also been satisfied. But still, there's something missing. There's a barrier there. Or everybody would be able that wanted to easily lose weight and keep it off. The third need is the need to feel. And the need to feel, unlike the need to know and need to do, is not logic. It is the emotional piece. It's the emotional piece of change. The need to feel is all about culture, feeling psychologically safe, and feeling connected as we are adapting and adopting to change. So let's unpack that. What does that really mean? Culture, psychological safety, and feeling connected. To me, psychological safety is simply as I'm adapting and adopting to change, it's okay for me to be human. And what that means is that as humans, we're all unique. We're all individuals. We all have strengths, quirks, and weaknesses. So it may take me a little bit longer to adapt to a change than it does for you. I might need a little bit more training and coaching because I make more mistakes with the change than you do. I might have a little bit more fear or anxiety around the change than you do. And that's all okay because we're meeting people individually where they are at for change. That's psychological safety. And I believe psychological safety is strongly connected to culture. And if we think about organizational culture, that's kind of your macro culture for your organization. It is your policies, your procedures, your norms, how decisions are made, how consensus is reached, how interconnected or siloed people are and they work. So there's macro culture, but there's also a culture that your team leader and your team that you work with every day kind of builds and brings forward. That microculture can either be a mirror of the macroculture from the organization or can be slightly different. And what matters most when adapting and adopting to change is that that microculture, your team and leader culture, is accepting you where you're at. And it's okay for you to share your humanity. Connectedness is about I have to feel connected, connection, and trust with the teammates and leader I have that I can expose my weaknesses or what I might perceive as flaws, my tasks that I do wrong, my mistakes I make, me taking a little bit longer. This is all about need to feel. Again, need to feel is at an individual level. If we think about discrete tasks on a project plan or change plan, what would need to feel look like? It's very gray. It's not something that our project professionals, managers, or leaders are super comfortable with because, again, it's very gray. and it's individualized much more so than the need to know and need to do. With human centric change, we will align to all of these, but the one that it has the strongest alignment to is this need to feel, really meeting people where they're at and celebrating their humanity. We will take these three needs and we'll map them into our strategies and actions for human centric change next. We're going to look at four elements that support a more human-centric approach to change and change management. We'll start by talking about the value of embedding and making visible more positives and strengths in your change planning and change execution efforts. We'll talk about how you build a community for change, which encourages co-creation and more collaboration. We'll understand how to meet impacted stakeholders really where they're at and make change a welcoming, inviting presence that invites them in. And finally, we'll look to understand or things to think about how we get in the lens of our impacted stakeholders and how we really lead and manage change from that lens. So, four elements in support of human centric change that we're going to step through. We'll start with the element of embedding, embodying, making visible more positives and strengths in our change efforts. As humans, we very much like to solve problems. We like to start from a position or a place of needs. Problems to solve, issues to fix, what's missing, what's wrong. Call it deficit thinking. And while that's not wrong or bad, if we balance that with intentionally looking at strengths and opportunities we can pursue, if we have a balanced approach to deficit and positive thinking, that will help us embed more positives and strengths into our change efforts. I want you to take a second and look at the two sound bites here. I'm going to say them out loud, and I want you to think about how they sound different and what sort of emotions, behavior, or energy that you have when I say them. The first is, what is missing that we need to fix? And now compare that with, what is present that we can build from? Very different sentiments from deficit to positive perspectives. Both important, and we will use a balanced approach. So, why embed more positive and strengths? Why make those more visible in our change efforts? Well, in fact, embedding positives and strengths, organizations that have done that have shown both soft and hard benefits. Soft benefits in that their employee are more engaged, their employee engagement scores are much higher than those organizations that do not look to bring this forward. And when positives and strengths are created and made visible, not only are people more engaged, they're more apt to want to do or create more positives. So that's on the soft benefits or the soft side. But what about the hard side or the hard benefits? In fact, organizations that embed, embody, and make visible more positives and strengths have shown to have better or improved job performance, which translates into a more successful organization, down to the profit and the profit margin, those hard benefits. So clearly, there's a case for bringing more positives and strengths into your organization, into the work we do in leading change and change management. So, how can we do that? How can we bring more positives and strengths into our change management journey, both in change planning and change execution? Here we find the ACMP Change Management Standard 5 process groups. If you are not familiar with the ACMP Change Management Standard, It is the foundation of the CCMP exam and certification. The process groups are sequential as displayed here. And if you look at process group 1, evaluate impact and organizational readiness is all about building, defining the case for change, defining how people are impacted, thinking about how ready for change the organization is. So, process group 1 is very early into our change management effort and activities. If you jump to process group 5, that's all about closing our change effort, transitioning to our business partners who ultimately own the outcomes of the project and the change. And that's generally where our work ends. So the ACMP standard process groups really are a pathing or a map of the entire change management journey from beginning to end. So, how can we use the ACMP Change Management Standard Process Group as a frame to bring more positives and strengths into our change? In Process Group 1, again, we are thinking about change impact and our organization's readiness for change and really defining that case for change. It's part of change planning. So, what if you thought about during process group number 1, what if you considered and brought forward and led with the positives, the strengths, the sweet spots of your organization? Every organization has things they're really good at, niches they have, or sweet spots. Identify those and bring those forward. Think about how you can start to bring those forward when we get into developing the strategy and the plan for change. Next, in process group 2, you're formulating your high level approach for change or your strategy. Here, consider your impacted stakeholder groups and your impacted individuals. What are the positives, strengths, good, sweet spots of those people or groups that we can look to leverage for good in our change? Process group 3 is all about developing our plan, our detailed timing, tactics, and milestones for change. Here we're going to consider past change efforts and we're going to look to bring forward things that worked really well in the past. What worked really well in the past to engage people or get people to be more cooperative or more collaborative or feeling more bought in or feeling less resistant for change? Identify what worked in the past and bring that forward. Process group 1, 2, and 3, as seen here, this is all part of our change planning. So we're thinking about the good of the organization, the good of our impacted stakeholder groups and impacted individuals, as well as the good and positives of past efforts. We're going to build all those into how we execute change. When we hit process group number 4, the change is going live and people are actually starting to use the change. Here, most organizations are going to wait to reward, recognize, or reinforce positives until the big milestone, big win, or big victory is hit. You don't want to do that. You want to start making visible the good things that are happening with the execution, those sound bites and those small victories and small wins. The reason you want to start making those more visible is that when people see that good things are happening, that will funnel itself into more good things. And we need that for momentum as well, that we are moving forward, we're moving in the right direction, we've got some positive strides going here, and we'll continue those forward. Finally, in process group 5, when we're looking to close out our change effort, which is closing it out and transitioning to the business ownership, consider this. What were the good things about this change? What key insights did we learn? What would we highlight? And what key insights do we have that potentially we will solve or solution? And then we're going to take all of our key insights and our light bulb, our flashlight and our light bulb. We're going to take all that good intelligence and we're going to turn that back around and put it into the next change for process group number 1. In that way, throughout our change journey, through change planning and change execution, we've looked to lift up and bring forward positives and strengths throughout our change. You'll find in our supporting job aid more positive framing questions for both change planning and change execution. Another way that you can embed or embody and bring positives and strengths forward is in the context of a conversation or a dialogue. This is one of my favorite tools. How this will work is you'll notice immediately that we've got time boxed sections 1, 2, and 3. How this starts is you have to craft an agenda and have your folks that are in your meeting or conversation come prepared to discuss the questions that sit in 1, 2, and 3. That's critically important that you have an agenda and you have people come prepared. When people enter the discussion, the conversation, or the meeting, the first 10 to 15 minutes, the discussion is about what's not working in the change, and that's noted by a red color. If you're doing a virtual meeting or an in person meeting, you can actually use the colors, the red, yellow, green, which help the brain know that we're shifting topics. So that can be very beneficial. First 10 to 15 minutes, what is not working in the change? You're being inclusive, people are feeling heard, and we're not trying to say that everything is perfect. We're going to document what people are saying. The next 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to shift focus into the yellow. And again, you can use color coded cues to help the brain know that we're shifting focus. We're going to ask people, and they've come prepared to talk about what is working in the change. We're going to record everything that they say for that. Finally, we'll shift focus to the final part of our discussion, which is in the green. What can we do in the future to make more work? Here, they're helping you co-create. They're giving you ideas and suggestions. You're documenting everything they're saying. This conversation is structured in a way that number one starts out with people feeling included. That's critically important. But then it shifts focus into a positive stance. What is working? And then finally, a co creation positive stance. What can we do in the future to make more work? This is critically important. We've all been in a meeting that we spend the entire hour on the red. What is not working? And then we have to have another meeting for the meeting. And when we step into another meeting, a following meeting, or back to our desk, we have what I call a negative productivity drag. We've left the meeting on a negative stance, and that will bleed into our work moving forward. If, in fact, you use this structure, people leave on a positive stance and you don't have any negative bleed. To really make this work, the next meeting you want to come around with everything you've documented, and you're going to talk about what they told you in section 3, the ideas, suggestions, and co-creation that they had, and how you've either been able to bring some of that to life or considered it and it was not a fit. So number 3, we're going to bring that back around in the next meeting. So we start there to talk about and again show that we're being inclusive. This is a great technique to structure conversations, meetings, and really bring positives and strengths front and center. From positive and strengths, we're going to move into how do you elevate engagement, continue to build on co-creation. We saw a little bit of that with the positive meeting framework, and improve collaboration. Change is really a community effort. Engagement, co-creation, and collaboration are key. So how can we elevate these in our change management efforts? Thinking about our need to know, remember that was our communication and information. We need both communication and engagement for change. But I would argue they're not the same thing. They are not the same thing. And because they're not the same thing, they don't have the same outcomes. If we think about communication on the left, I'm going to simply define communication as sender to receiver. And certainly, sender to receiver, we've all seen those drawings that show sender to receiver, and there are feedback loops, but those loops can be minimal. And when I think about communication, I oftentimes think about just flat content or flat information that is easily forgettable, not memorable at all. Contrast that with engagement, co creation, and collaboration. These are all active. They require active participation and two or multiple way sharing. When we engage, we co create, collaborate, that taps into our emotions. And when that happens, we have better memory recall of information. Co creation and collaboration also really meets people where they are. It helps promote inclusion and ownership, buy in, and it lowers apprehension and change resistance. Engagement, as opposed to communication, has the ability to propel a lot more action for change. Yes, engagement can include communication, but the key here is how do we deliver information in engaging ways and through those that have engaging relationships, trusted relationships with one another. Doing that, we promote better memory recall and more action. One way to engage, co create, and collaborate is to create and leverage a change story. If you know anything about storytelling for business or the benefits of storytelling, I'm going to give a few more tidbits on that here. According to Jennifer Aker at Stanford, things told in story form have improved memory recall 22 times over flat communication. 22 times. So using a change story in an engaging way has a huge potential for a great return on investment. Stories in general, our brain is familiar with the construct and likes it. We've been told stories since the time we were kids. So our brain is used to stories that have both a beginning, middle, and an end. Our change story technique will lean into all of that. It starts out with part one of our story, which is what is driving the need for change? What is the current state? What is that case for change, that burning platform, the current pain or opportunity that the change is trying to resolve? So I start this thinking about 3 to 5 bullets about what is really driving the need for this change. Part two of our story, I'm considering what the future will be. I'm thinking of the visionary future. And that includes what's in it for me, the benefits specific to my role, my department, my location, or me individually, as well as what's in it for us as an organization. Again, I'm going to document 3 to 5 bullets there. Finally, I'm going to identify and document 2 to 3 people facing things that people can expect that will help them get to the future state. 3 parts of the change story. What is driving the change? What will the future be? And 3, how we get to the future state. The change story can be very effective and flexible. What will the future be can be defined or tailored for the different benefits of your different stakeholder groups. How we get to the future, that is time sensitive. So over time, that could be evolving as we're moving through other phases of the change or the sprint or the journey or the program. So the change story can be an evolving deliverable. It doesn't have to be kind of a one-time deliverable that we never use again. And why I position this here with co-creation and collaboration is there are many things you can do with the change story. You can have your change champions create their own or co create change stories and share them along. You can have your sponsor create a change story and share that change story in town halls and things of that nature. You can have people play back the change story in their own words. Really, the ways in which you can leverage the change story both across stakeholder groups and at different parts and places within your change journey are endless. You can find the technique for this change story, the boxes that I've shown here, the bullets, and what sits within each part of our story in our session supporting job aid. In the job aid, there's also some tips and tricks for authoring effective stories and ways in which you can use this story with multiple stakeholder groups. We move from engagement, co creation, and collaboration into getting into the shoes of and leading change from the shoes of our impacted stakeholders, our final element of human centric change. So, why is this so important that we get in the shoes of our stakeholders, that we're really seeing it from their lens and leading and managing change, the journey of change from their purview? Consider this. Most organizations have multiple projects and change going on at one time, but each of those projects and change efforts generally are siloed, meaning that they have their own unique funding, their own resourcing, their own deliverables. But if you think about your stakeholders, is that how they really truly adapt and adopt to change? One project and change at a time. Think about that. I would argue that our stakeholders, if we got into their lens, it would look more like the picture on the right here, that all the change that they are adapting and adopting to is in a ball. And what I mean by that is all the change that they are trying to operationalize still from go live 4 to 6 months ago, the newly implemented or launched change that they got last month, as well as what the preparatory change, preparing for change that's coming in the next quarter. All of that sits in this ball, and it's one big ball. If we really want to lead and direct change, the way people adapt and adopt to it, we have to be able to see that big picture to really understand and lead from that big picture. And while that's not easy to understand kind of everything that your stakeholders are contending with, it's not easy to have that at your fingertips and be able to lead from that vantage point. I think it's critically important. And if you're able to get some sort of a picture or a feel for what they're adapting and adopting to, there are some things you can try to help minimize the weight of change, minimize some of the fatigue and saturation, as well as lead more the way that they're adapting and adopting, which again is not one project at a time. So, what can you do if you are able to understand that big picture of change, the change from your stakeholders' lens or purview? What are some things that you could do with that information? Potentially, you could reduce the amount of change disruption and overall change impact with planning. If you have that purview and you're able to share that with your leadership, might there be an ability to shift some project dates? Because simply we have so much change going on, people are fatigued and saturated. Can we shift some project dates? The answer might be no. But at least when we lead from the big picture, we're asking the question. We're bringing it up as a consideration. The second way to potentially reduce the overall amount of disruption and impact of change is if we can't shift the project dates, do we have a potential to take those projects and implement them in smaller phases, kind of move the timeline out and phase out our go live? Again, the answer may be no, but if we have the conversation, if we raise the issue of the amount of change, fatigue, and saturation in the environment, at least we are bringing that forward into the discussion. The other thing we can do, if all these fail, if we have the big picture, if we are able to get that big picture, get into the shoes of our impacted stakeholders, that lens, the other thing we can do without having to move any dates around is we can look for like, something I call change connections. If we find changes that are being implemented or going live or delivering that have like timing, go live dates, they're going live to like stakeholder groups and they impact same or similar business processes or practices, is there the potential for us to connect some dots? And what I mean by that is perhaps for two changes, we would generally each change would have its own communication, own training, its own measurement and surveys. Do we have an opportunity to do one communication for two projects, one training, one measurement survey, and bring both of those change efforts into one deliverable? This allows us to simplify the weight of change while still providing the value of change management actions, activities, and guardrails. These aren't silver bullets, and leading leading from the big picture, having that purview is difficult to come by, but certainly there's benefits or value of being able to do this. So consider how you might be able to get more into the shoes of your impacted stakeholders. So, what did we do today? What did we do in this session? Let's put it all together. I defined for you human centric change, which was similar to customer centricity, but it had an employee or an impacted stakeholder focus. I made the case that given what's happening in our business operating environments around attrition and turnover and innovation and change, that the time to bring some more human centric elements or human centricity into how we lead and manage change is now. We talked about four elements of human centric change with a supporting job aid. First, we talked about having a balanced approach, but bringing positives and strengths more into change execution and change planning. In the job aid, you have positive framing questions, which will allow you to bring those positives and strengths to the forefront. We talked about co creation and collaboration and really meeting people where they are and inviting them in. Here we talked about using stories, building stories, creating stories, and sharing stories. You have the storytelling technique with some tips and tricks in the session job aid. And finally, we finished off with talking about understanding change from our impacted stakeholder perspective, that if in fact we can lead and manage change more from their purview, which is not one project and change at a time, through planning and connecting some efforts, that there would be large value and benefit there. I want to thank you for attending today's session on human centric change. I do hope you found lots of value in the session and you're able to take the job aid for immediate practice in your change management efforts. Reach out and get in touch with me on feedback for the session or anything I might be able to help you with. Have a great rest of your conference.